Because life is not rosy, welcome to Life in Violet, a feminist option for social change. Life in Violet, to build up empowerment for women and girls, a better and safer society for all. Hello, welcome to another emission of Life in Violet, Global Voice. And well, you know me, but I'm Verónica Pereira Carrillo, and we are today here with my dearest friend and brilliant psychologist. She's connecting from Australia, and she's Angela BAMBLETT, a UN consultant and a deeply committed a feminist. Yeah. Hi, Angela. How are you?
Good morning from Australia, Veronica. Good morning to your listeners today.
Thank you so much for connecting today and at this time, because it's 7 a.m. of Wednesday, the 25th of May in Australia. So today we're going to talk about public policies, which is kind of, I don't know, kind of alien to the traditional, let's say, role or feminine world. And it's kind of scary sometimes not to think it's politics. Well, it has to do with politics, but it's a kind of politics that is, that has to do with our everyday life. So what is, let's begin. Public policies are the projects, activities that a state, a nation designs and manages through government and public administration in order to meet the needs of a society. So public policies can also be understood as the actions, regulatory measures, laws, and spending priorities on an issue enacted by a government entity. To sum it up, what the state does or does not do for the inhabitants of the country. So public policies refer to a variety of subjects or sectors: education, of course, social development, health, public safety, infrastructure, communications, energy, agriculture, etc. Sometimes, and very often, public policies can mean life or death. Let's think, for instance, of the US, where in 2021, there were 249 school shootings, just shootings that happened in schools. And since 1970, there have been 1,316 only school shootings. That is apart from the shootings in churches or any other public places. Let's see, the European countries have had their share of school shootings, of course, although not as frequently. For instance, let's mention that there were 8 German school shootings in Germany since 1913. 1 in Lithuania since 1925, 1 in Sweden in 1961, etc., etc., etc. What's the difference? Public policies, precisely on gun control, license to purchase, to possess, and to carry weapons. And I'm going to give you, from our perspective, because our topic today is women and public policies, just 3 points. Public policies are not sex neutral. Both their design and implementation have an impact on economic activity and income distribution, and therefore on various inequality gaps. Second point, policies can make the women's agenda advance or the contrary. Let's have a look a little bit at what happened, what's the difference between a pro-woman or pro-education for women public policy and the contrary. On the black and white photograph, you can see girls, students, in 1950, in the 1950s in Afghanistan. And you can see the picture in color with the ladies with in burqa. They are, this picture has been taken last year to illustrate that human rights for women can be advanced or deteriorated, and it also depends on the resistance women oppose and the advocacy we can do. This was in 1950s, and this 30 years later, Iran in 1980. Women were denied the right of to be educated and to go out alone. Well, you know what that means. So we tend to think that maybe well, we have these rights and nobody's going to take them out from us, but unfortunately, that's not the case. Angela, would you like to make a comment about this, please?
Thank you, Veronica. Just dealing with the technical aspects. I think a lot of women don't realize that their contribution to public policy is as important as it is. We've just had an election here in Australia, and what's been interesting in listening to the debate is that we've heard an awful lot about the personalities of our politicians, but not nearly enough about the policies that they're promulgating and what those policies might mean for us now as women and for our families, but also what those policies might mean down the track. I think you've given some very, very good examples of public policy and how it can change and how it has very direct and significant impacts on the lives of women and their children. Because I'd like to emphasize that, if you like, women's rights are human rights and it affects all the people around them as well. But also sometimes some of these changes are more subtle and we're not always aware of those changes or how to look out for them. So certainly in Australia, what we are very lucky, and I've worked in public service as well as with the United Nations, is that we have a number of women involved in public service and also in NGOs. But I think they often underestimate the value that they add. The other comment I really want to emphasize today, when you're thinking about policy and how you might contribute to it, okay, first of all, it starts with, if you have the right to vote, please vote. But don't vote mindlessly. Don't vote on trends. Really ask the questions, really think about who this person you're voting is and what they might be representing, and more importantly, what their party is saying. Dig a little deeper. We're also a bit inclined as humans to seek out news, if you like, or information that reflects our own views. I'm wanting to encourage women to look at both sides of the argument before they come to a conclusion, to take what we would call an evidence-informed approach. So look at what the research says, look at what the arguments are, because it's very easy to go along with that trend because your friends think so, or because that's what the news is telling us. Have a look a little bit closer. So medical policies, for example, certainly a mental health are often strongly influenced about policy, and makes a big difference in terms of access. I think we're looking at the abortion debate in the United States as an example of that, how that can be changed by the personal views of a group, rather than looking at what the research really does say about this decision. So often we let emotions influence us too when it comes to public policy. So we need a bit of self-discipline to be able to stand back and really think about it and be critical and acknowledge our own biases as well, because we all have them. None of us are excluded from that. But, you know, again, I just would like to encourage women to get involved, to make that thinking, and to not sit back and think someone else will make those decisions for me, to think about how they can contribute to that.
Thank you, thank you. And you are so right, because everybody can contribute and have influence on public policies. Individually, like for instance, Eleanor Roosevelt, who made possible the impossible, that what seemed impossible, that is to have two nations and two blocks of nations during the beginning of the Cold War, at the end of Second World War. She made the signatories sign the Declaration of Human Rights, which is enormous. And I have to add to this that her effort comes from, and this incredible blessing for humanity came from one lady who struggled a lot, and she was 64 or 68 when she made this incredible deed, no? And also there is, of course, the contribution of women in a collective way, and or in let's say in groups, in associations. And let me introduce you to you Marcela Benavides, who is a lady. She's the chair of an association of women and girls with disabilities, Simunidis, that's the name of her institution. And she and her team made it possible to include the human rights of people, that is women and men with disabilities, in the constitution, in the new constitution of Chile.
Good evening to all of you. I am Marcela Benavides, an anthropologist from the University of Chile, director of the National Association of Mental Health Service Users Corporation, ANUSAM, and president of the Emancipating Circle of Women and Girls with Disabilities Corporation of Chile, Simonides. This political campaign has been developed since January of this year as an associative movement of people with disabilities. I decided to found the Emancipatory Circle of Women and Girls with Disabilities in Chile, Simonides, echoing the demand of women with disabilities to be empowered and especially to exercise advocacy for the rights of women and girls with disabilities, a matter that was not resolved by participating with groups led for many years by leaders with macho and autarchic imprint, and above all, not aware of the duty to promote the implementation on the convention based on an associative movement. On this occasion, we called for a vigil waiting for the Constituent Convention's general and particular debate for the voting of the articles on the rights of persons with disabilities. There was a positive impact of all the work carried out by the team. The drafting of the legal document of the 4 axes we promoted through postings and videos allowed for our regulation proposal 71 to be enabled for the debate in particular in an upcoming commission session. Last April 18th, in the plenary of the Constitutional Convention, we won. We won. It was the victory of paragraphs 1, 2, and 4 of Article 6 in the plenary session of the Constitutional Convention, where the legal evaluation of our initiative finally succeeded. The constituents opted for the legal certainty of the Simonidis proposal, together with the explanatory notes the members received and read during the debate. Both were drafted by the lawyer Maria Soledad. Article 4 was approved by the plenary with more than 2/3 of the quorum and passed to the draft of the Constitution, emphasizing the relevance of clauses 1, 2, and 4. But there is still the last proceeding of the rejected clauses we have to fight for, such as the clause on the right to independent life and the right to electoral political participation of persons with disabilities through legally defined reserved quotes. Thank you very much. Marcela Benavides, anthropologist, Universidad of Chile, President Simonidis Santiago of Chile, April 21st, 2022.
Thank you so much indeed, Marcela. And this is an incredible victory. And this is also an example of how women can influence on public policies, not only for our own rights and empowerment, but also for the well-being of and the improvement of our communities. And now we are going to go to a, let's say, musical pause, but then please don't leave us, because we have two panelists, incredible panelists and feminists. One is Janet Fraser, who is an author from Australia and a committed woman for the national, well, she has been national convener of the Australia Home Birth Network, Jaya's Birth, since 2004. She writes about feminism, history, human rights. I'm going to give her a complete introduction in the next, after our musical pause. And also from the US, we have Maria Keffler, who is a co-founder of Advocates Protecting Children Partners for Ethical Care and the Arlington Parent Coalition in Virginia, USA. That's a wonderful interpretation of a one voice choir, and a good example that there are incredible things that children can do for their own well-being and development. Okay, so now this is the moment we've been waiting for, and let's welcome Janet Fraser from Australia and Maria Keffler from the US. I'm going to give the whole introduction, because they are exceptional ladies and very committed feminists. So I'll begin with Janet Fraser, who is a mother, a poet, a historian, and has been, as I said, national convener of the Australian Home Birth Network, Jaya's Birth, since 2004. She writes about feminism, history, human rights, birth, and parenting. Janet is on the management committee of the Feminist Legal Clinic and co-founded founded the NSW Women's Guild in 2019. She was a winner of the Eva Bacon Award in 2021 and given in honor of the communist organizer Eva Bacon and awarded by IWD Brisbane Minlin for her long commitment to women's liberation. Her book, Born Still, a Memoir of Grief, was published in 2020 by the Australian publishers Spinifex Press. She has been published in the Melbourne University Journal, Hecate, and has been published by the Hunter Writers Center, Grieve Collection, and other journals. She also writes at Patreon, where she foments women's studies and revolution at Dispatches from the Matriarchy. You can also catch her on Facebook and Twitter. Hi, Janet, welcome to Life in Violet.
Thank you, thank you. I'm coming to you from Gundarra outside of Sydney. So thank you for having me.
In Australia, of course. And on the other side of the oceans, there is Maria Keffler, who is a co-founder of Advocates Protecting Children, Partners for Ethical Care, and the Arlington Parent Coalition, as I said before, in Virginia, USA. She's an author, a speaker, and teacher with a background in educational psychology. Ms. Keffler has fought to support families and protect children from unethical activism and dangerous policies around sexuality and transgender ideology since 2018. She's the author of multiple books, including Desist, Detrans, and Detox, Getting Your Child Out of the Gender Cult. Ms. Keffler lives in Arlington, Virginia, as we said, USA, with her husband and 3 teenage children. Welcome, Maria. What a pleasure to have you in Life in Violet.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm among some pretty distinguished ladies. So it's really a pleasure to get to come and hear what you all have to say.
Yes, because there are so many institutions where women are militant and fight for our own rights, but also for those of our families, of course, and our community in general. So let's talk a little bit about the history and the mandate of your institution, the institutions you are working for, and why is this transition business a misogynistic approach and practice? Let's begin with the first one, the first part, the history and mandate of your NGOs. Who wants to begin?
After you, Maria.
Oh, all right. Thanks, Janet. I was never much of an activist or very political until just a few years ago. A friend of mine called me. She was looking around our local school district's website for summer school information, and she came across a working group meeting on transgender student policy. And she said, "It's tonight. I really feel like we should go. Would you go with me?" So I went, and having been a teacher and understand, I've been involved in the public schools. My kids went to public schools up until 3 years ago. I always had a lot of trust for the public schools, but sitting in this meeting, there were about a dozen or 15 people sitting around a table talking about what they wanted to see for the transgender student policy. And the big takeaway from the evening was that they considered parents a threat, and kids needed to be protected from their parents. and how to cut parents out of the equation. And I was really horrified. And as I started digging into this and really looking at where is this coming from, I realized this is a multi-tentacled thing that's coming from so many different places in society, different policies, but it's really exploitive of children and of women. And we formed the Arlington Parent Coalition. It started with 5 moms sitting there talking about how are we going to address this? How are we going to push back on this? I'm still a member of the Arlington Parent Coalition, but about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, I got the opportunity to form the Partners for Ethical Care. And they are an organization working to stop the unethical medicalization of children in the name of transgender medicine. And in October of last year, we started Advocates Protecting Children, wanting to really focus on supporting people who are trying to navigate this. So we get a lot of parents coming to us. We get pastors coming to us. We get organizations, teachers, counselors, who are dealing with this, and all they're hearing is you have to affirm the child and the transgender identity. You have to affirm, and we offer a different path. We're trying to help people navigate this in ways that are safe for children, safe for women, safe for families. So that's our history in a nutshell. Oh, I can't hear you.
So impressive and so necessary. So necessary. I must say that always in Life in Violet, La Vida en Violeta also, that is, this is our 5th season, we have shown and expressed solidarity with all vulnerable or underprivileged collectives. And that's why precisely we have to make known this fraud that is harming so many people. Fortunately, there are a lot of LGTB associations, even T associations that are waking up and seeing the harm, the permanent harm that is being inflicted to them, and all our solidarity from here. And Janet, so what is the history of and the mandate of the institutions where you work?
Thanks. Maria, I've read your book, so thank you for your work. It's wonderful.
Thank you. That's such an honor.
We use it in Australia too. Well, as convener of the Feminist Legal Clinic, I am part of the only legal clinic in the whole of Australia which only supports the rights of girls and women. So this means that the cases that we deal with, and we don't have a great capacity for caseload, we have 2 solicitors, both unpaid. Mostly the casework that we deal with is to do with male violence against women, family law matters, and lately, the last couple of years, more and more anti-discrimination matters as women struggle with the incursions of trans ideology into their workplaces.
Okay, we have to say that there is a clear distinction that has to be made between the people, the real people, and the ideology. It's so astonishing that there is a minute portion of the population that has in the name of the rights of that minority, really small minority, the rest of the people, including we women, we are 25 million in Argentina, according to the latest census, and there are 21 million men, and only 5,000 people who declare themselves non-binary. So the curious thing is that everybody has to be, let's say, has to comply to an ideology that goes far beyond the rights of minorities, but goes to an incredibly rich business, which is the end of I mean, it seems to be the cause of all this. So, Angela, would you like to make any comments about this? What we shared?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in these sorts of issues, but I just want to make a comment in terms of my own clinical experience in this area. The number of parents that have approached me for counselling because they're really distressed at the pressure placed on them and their children to make these very permanent decisions. And again, just going back to the evidence, going back to the research, what does the research say about this? And so often they'll come and approach me because they just want time to think, time to find, they're not anti-trans. They're not anti the minority groups. They're not anti different forms of sexual expression. They just want the best decision for their child because it is life-altering and permanent. Now, out of the very small group I have looked after over the years, and it's under 10, okay, 2 people, I usually just say, take your time, choose your use the gender and pronouns that you wish to, dress in the opposite gender or the gender of your orientation as you wish, but don't do anything permanent. After puberty settles, most people go back to their original sex. So out of that small group, 2 went on in young adulthood to go on and have surgery. One person is very happy and comfortable with that, which is great, and they made the decision as an adult, they could consent to it. The other person also made a decision as an adult and consented to it and is deeply unhappy with that decision. So these are very, very serious decisions. And these are decisions, in my opinion, because individuals are affected, should not be made on trends or policies, but should be made very much on what the research. And the other thing, I guess, that really disturbs me, and I'll be upfront, I'm also a mother of 5, but the undermining of the parent-child relationship. Parent-child attachment is so critically important to your mental health throughout the lifespan. It is not for the state to undermine that or to step in or have policies that undermine that. We really need to be, whatever the situation is for families, and families come in all shapes and sizes and formations, we need to be supporting a healthy parent-child attachment for the sake of those children. So I feel if we could take a more child-focused approach to this, considering the developmental and cognitive needs, but also abilities, capacities of children to consent and understand their vulnerabilities. And if we can think about what safety and protective factors we need to have in place so that they can develop normally. And when I say normal, that's a very wide thing, but of course, but develop and have happy, healthy lives over the course of their lifespan. That's what we need to be doing. Again, coming back to taking an evidence-informed approach, not an ideologically based approach to what people might need.
Exactly. Thank you, Angela. I know I never do this, but I think it's a must in order to understand what we are talking about. Let me show you, it's very, very short, this video, which is available in YouTube, of course.
Hi guys, I've been missing for a while, and this video is completely going to change everything. I know a lot of people are going to leave this channel, but I honestly don't care. I've been taking time to reflect, and I went into therapy since I last uploaded a video, and I got to look back at my life and the last 2 years of my life, and I realized it's been a complete hell. My life has just went down the hill ever since I had so-called bottom surgery trying to be a woman. And I regret it. I regret it 100%. I regret too that I ever thought I was trans, that I ever thought I could be a woman, and I wish I could go back and not have any surgeries or medically transition or take any hormones. To be honest, like, this transition has costed me so much of my health, both mental and physical, as well as certain relationships in my family. It costed me job opportunities. It costed me a career that I could have had. I don't know if you guys know it, but I do have like 2 master's degrees and I'm a CPA. And honestly, like, this whole transition and my whole like trying to be a woman thing completely derailed my life. And right now I have osteoporosis, scoliosis, I have a lump in my breast, I have 1-inch vagina. And yeah, so it's like, I have no sex drive. I'm trying to do the transition. I'm taking testosterone injection at this point, but I can't grow any facial hair, like nothing is happening. I mean, obviously I still like wearing makeup and stuff, but makeup and hair does not make a woman. So
and let's finish with that. No, makeup and the wig doesn't make a woman. How does your institution, NGO, or association aim at influencing on public policies? In what ways, by which means, and what channels, and what support do you receive? Let's begin with Janet this time.
At Feminist Legal Clinic, one of the many things that we do is write submissions to government inquiries. We write both on behalf of clients and on behalf of women in general to government departments asking for, please explain about policies which harm the rights of girls and women. Of course, public policy is dependent in part on statute, so on the laws, the legislation of a country. And in 2013, the Anti-Discrimination Act, which is a federal act in Australia, we have both federal and state government here, was altered to simply insert gender identity as on a par with sex. And there was no public debate about this. We were fortunate that one of the few UN recognised groups in Australia, COAL, the Coalition of Activist Lesbians, were onto it. I certainly had no clue that this was happening. And they made a submission about how harmful this was going to be to the rights of lesbians, but to all women as well. And of course, it just went ahead. Because, as you've noted, this is not about a tiny minority of people who are suffering from something we call gender dysphoria, which is really sex stereotyping dysphoria. This is about the massive reach of huge corporations. And in Australia, they have almost come to be embodied by the AIDS Council of New South Wales, which is, for people watching outside of Australia, it's our Stonewall. You know, the UK talk a lot about Stonewall. That's their main organisation that used to represent lesbian and gay rights and is now entirely focused on undermining the rights of lesbian and gay people and girls and women as well. So public policy certainly exists, but in Australia, women are almost entirely cut out of anything to do with public policy that affects us. We are not consult women when writing policies about women. They consult with the organisations which purport to be representative of trans-identifying people's organisations.
They tell me that my connection is very unstable. But go ahead, please, Janet. We didn't hear the very last part. I didn't.
I was talking about how women are entirely cut out of public policy discussions in Australia. in the recent federal election, we were fortunate that one radical feminist took one for the team and stood with the Liberal Party, which is our conservative side of politics here. And now their loss in the election is being blamed on her and her belief that particularly women's rights in sport matter, but that also single-sex organisations and spaces are important to girls and women. And we have been steamrolled as if we don't exist over the last few years.
It's incredible because in Chile, well, we had that incredible good news from our friend Marcela. I send you my regard, Marcela. I say hello to her. I know she's watching us. And but also there was a half sanction that is the Chamber of Deputies passed a law by which we are not called women any longer, but menstruating persons, which means that I'm not a woman. Of course, I'm not a man, I'm not trans, I'm nothing, which is, and so many millions of women who do not menstruate to begin with, girls, and I mean, this is just crazy. And as you say, it goes against the LGBT minorities and also against people with gender dysphoria, as they call it, because they are using very harmful and very cruel and invasive methods and surgeries and etc. And yeah, they are ruining their lives. You can see on internet there are sites of Detrans young people, and it's really heartbreaking to listen to their testimonies. Maria,
where I live in New South Wales, we finally legalised abortion in 2019. But the price of that was legislation in which women and girls don't appear, not once. So it's all about the pregnant people, but the medical practitioners, they get titles, they get like doctor and midwife, but women are completely erased in favour of these mythical pregnant people. And now South Australia as well has gone the same way.
In 2021, the salutation for the 8th of March from the Minister of Health didn't mention women, nothing, not once. So it was carefully worded, and it was a woman, and a very competent woman, and a very well-intentioned woman who has bought this nonsense, because it's so. Maria, let's go to our second question about the influence on public policies, ways, means, channels, support. It was very moving for me to listen to Janet saying that she had read your book. So there is an influence and there is a networking, and that is precisely why I dared to have an English version of La Vida Violeta, Life in Violet. And sorry about my English, and many of my guests are Spanish speakers who struggle with their English, but we have to do this to build these bridges. So going back to the influence on public policies, Maria, what can you tell us?
Yeah, Veronica, your English is brilliant. Lo siento, no habla español. My Spanish is muy poquito, so I'm impressed with anyone who can speak a second language as brilliantly as you do. My organization is a nonprofit organization in the United States. That's a 501c3 according to the tax code. And so we have to be very careful about what we do politically. We are not permitted to support politicians or to put money toward legislation. I won't go into all of the pros and cons of that, but it's just a reality for us that we have to be very careful. What we mostly focus on is, again, trying to support people who want another path. The book that I wrote for parents, I've always wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a novelist. That's what I was working on. Every writer wants to find a niche group for whom she can write something that will really be well read and popular. And I have to say that the success of that book is heartbreaking, because every time a copy of that book sells, we know that's another family or another group that's being negatively affected by this. So I don't know whether to say I'm grateful that it's a successful book or not, because I wish it never had to have been written at all. But that's really what our organization does. We do have a weekly checklist that we send out with things for people to do, and you can sign up for it. Just email our organization, advocatesprotectingchildren@gmail.com, and we'll sign you up for that. And every week we send it out with
Sorry, Maria, can you repeat the site, please?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our site is advocatesprotectingchildren.org, and our email is advocatesprotectingchildren@gmail.com. The list that we send out is practical things that everyone can do. Copy this sentence and send it to this legislator to tell them that you disagree or agree with this policy. The media is calling men she and calling women he. Here's an argument, send it to them and tell them to stop doing that. So those are the kinds of things we send out in our checklist every week. A lot of what we do is connecting people with help. People write to us and they say, I'm in the state of Ohio. I've got a child who's saying he's transgender. What do I do? We'll connect them with help in Ohio, whether that's another organization or where it's hard for us to find therapists for people, but we try to help people figure out how to vet therapists for themselves and how they can find out who's trustworthy and who's not. Those are some of the ways we tend to focus more on people and organizations than on policy, but we do a lot of testifying. One of my colleagues, Erin Brewer, was a former trans kid. She believed she was transgender from the time she was about 6. I don't know for how many years, but she testifies very often on legislation about these conversion therapy bans, which basically prevents therapists from doing anything but saying, yes, you're transgender. She goes and does a lot of testifying in different states. So those are some of the things that we're doing to try to push back on the policies.
That's so incredible. And that's why I love doing this, because I get to know what women are doing, and we are doing incredible things around the world. Angela, would you like to make a comment?
Oh, I'm just thrilled with what Maria is saying there, and I'm looking at the website as she's speaking, and there it is, you know, that they offer robust research and evidence-based information about the mental and physical health of children who suffer gender dysphoria. So that allows people to make the good decisions, the right decisions for them. The comments on legislation and that, even with my own psychological society, there's certain things I can and cannot talk about that is now legislated about, and that's where it becomes very difficult. And Maria, I really appreciate your comment about finding a therapist, if you like, that's going to create that neutral space so people can make, so they're not a purveyor of the ideology, because I think we can become partners in crime in this, but that we create that neutral space so that the client can make the best decision for them. And I think that's becoming increasingly difficult, if you like, when I see my own professional organization getting more and more politicized. Now, on one hand, we do want mental health organizations to be advocating, but I want them advocating for evidence-informed care. I don't want them advocating for an ideology. Mm-hmm. And going back to your comments earlier, Veronica, about menstruating persons and lactating persons, etc., and not being women, it's almost like as societies we're creating these group delusions. Now, the old Freudian analysts would understand what I'm saying about group delusions. We see it, you know, we saw it in Nazi Germany, where we see it when information is controlled. So this is, you know, we need to be asking ourselves, is this reality, or is this some sort of delusion that's happening here? And if so, what are the consequences? And the consequences are heartbreaking. So we might have this trendy idea or this thoughtful idea, but please think about the person in that video you showed us today and their distress.
Yes, there are many like this person. And about this reducing us to organs, it's very curious because men are still men. They are not ejaculating persons or whatever, and always the organs that they aim at is our sexual or reproductive organs, which means that if we are just a kind of set of organs put together, we can sell them, we can rent them, which is of course
hypocrisy. Yes.
Yeah, what is happening with, so there are huge interests, economic interests, financial interests that we have to resist as women, of course, but also as part of the human race. I mean, this is a total, as you said, delirium, collective delirium, and orchestrated collective delirium. Let's go to a poetic.
I make one comment, Veronica. I just think maybe Janet could say something to us about the politicization of women's bodies. I mean, only 150 years ago, we believed that women's mental health was influenced by their uterus. And I mean, that goes back to ancient times when we said hysteria, which is a derivative of the word uterus. Hysteria is caused by our uterus wandering around our bodies uncontrolled. So there's been these enormous fears of women and women's sexuality. I mean, doctors would masturbate women as a treatment for mental health to calm them down. So, you know, I'm not a historian, but there's so many examples of this. And I feel with this group delusion, it's yet another one. We think we're so advanced and we've made such progress, but actually, you know, I think we need to be a little bit more humble about where we are in history.
That's why I showed the pictures of Afghanistan and Iran, because it's the same, it's exactly the same thing, the same misogynistic thing of calling hysteria and hysteric and only focusing on our uterus, no? What came from the ancient Greeks, that's what they are doing for economic gain. No? Let's listen to Maya Angelou with Still I Rise in a live performance.
You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll arise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Just because I walked as if I have oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my sassiness upset you? Don't take it so hard just because I laugh, as if I have gold mines digging in my own backyard. You can shoot me with your words. You can cut me with your lies. You can kill me with your hatefulness, but just like life, all right. Does my sexiness offend you? Oh. Does it come as a surprise that I dance? As if I have diamonds at the meeting of my thighs. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past rooted in pain, I rise. A black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling and bearing in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak miraculously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And so, there I go.
She's incredible, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yes. I have to say that on May the 28th, it's the International Day of Women's Health. This year, the call to action for action is Women's Health Matters. Remember, this is a not well-known commemoration, let's call it, but it's something to ponder about because health services have traditionally had as reference the male body and anatomy and physiology, and women's health and women's anatomy, physiology, all our illnesses have been disregarded. Many of them, clinical analysis have not evolved as they should, etc. So just to remind you of this day that began in 1987 as a result of the 5th International Meeting on Women and Health held in San Jose, Costa Rica. So a group of women activists proposed the institutionalization of May 28th as the International Day of Action for Women's Health to reflect on the multiple causes of illness and death that affect the health and lives of girls and women around the world. So let's go to our third question. And I would also like to ask you for a final message. In what way can people, we women, we feminists, help your mandate, the solutions that you suggest and the work you are carrying out, please?
Well, I really appreciated what Angela said about really looking at what's happening. Look at both sides, especially in the United States, but I think around the world, we're really being siloed into two separate tribes. And I think this is undermining our ability to really make progress on anything, because we have this idea, if you don't agree with everything that I say, you're on the other side and I have to hate you. We really need to break away from that. We need to be working together across the aisle and really looking at what is in these policies, what is in the legislation, what is happening, where is the money coming from that's funding this, and how do we even fight that in ways that protect the most vulnerable. Our mandate is primarily around children, but what's happening to children is affecting families, it's affecting women. We need to guard those most vulnerable people and really ask ourselves, what do we want to see in the next generation? Because I think what we're seeing right now is very destructive.
It is indeed. Janet, please.
Thanks. I'd just like to address your point about the compartmentalization and medicalization of women's body parts and the ways in which trans ideology works with some of the biggest corporations in the world to make women into sections of bodies which can then be exploited and marketed. And there's no clearer way to show this than the last couple of weeks. We've had the AusPath, so that's the Australian chapter of the international group that is supposedly to do with trans health, whatever that means. And the main conference sponsor for them in Darwin, which is in the north of Australia, is an IVF clinic. Could it be any clearer? So an IVF clinic is going to benefit from the fact that we are sterilising children, because when people cry foul when you say this, I always want to say to them, well, what do you think happens when you prevent children from going through normal puberty? When you suppress puberty in children, you don't only impact brain development and bone development, you also impact their fertility. That's one of the key purposes of puberty, right? Is moving from your childlike state into the fertile state that allows the animal that is humans to reproduce. So if you prevent puberty and then you give children artificial hormones in the wrong kind for their body and cause iatrogenic harm to those children, you sterilise them. So IVF clinics love this, of course, because if you get kids who go through the family court in Australia because their parents don't agree that they should be sterilised and then they're seeking hormones, those kids are often asked if they would like to freeze eggs or sperm, and then they can have those put into a woman's body at some point in the future and have their own babies. So this is an absolute gold mine that is the perpetual, continually giving golden goose as far as these corporations are concerned. I'd also like to say that you spoke about Eleanor Roosevelt, who is indeed a very admirable woman, but it was actually Jessie Street, an Australian woman, who made sure that women were inserted into the International Declaration on Human Rights, which now says that men and women are worthy of human rights, whereas it once said men. So I think most Australians don't even know that that happened. In terms of moving forward, I think that what's really important is that women get involved. A lot of women are frightened, and I completely understand this. Women are what we in Australia call the precariat. They are the most precariously employed group in society, particularly over the last couple of years, where a lot of women have lost their jobs. So we are last in and first to be sacked. So the idea of speaking up and challenging the fact that your workmates are all putting their pronouns in their email signatures, for instance, or the fact that your work toilets are now including men, is really frightening. And I really get that. However, if you are not in a position to speak out, you can do other things. You can research, you can write, you can join the groups that exist, like the Feminist Legal Clinic, which you can join for only $10 a year, so please join up. You can...
Can you repeat the title of the clinic, please?
Sure. The feministlegalclinic.org, if you want to find us, and it's $10 a year to join. We are women only, but men are welcome to donate. So you could get involved in, for instance, the IWD Brisbane Meanjin group, who are amazing powerhouses, and they have weekly or fortnightly, I can't remember, meetings face-to-face, because they really want to help women build those bridges. And those are private, so those of us who are feeling anxious about speaking out publicly are catered to. They also hold all kinds of conferences, speaking events. There's one on this coming weekend in Brisbane for those who can attend face-to-face, and for those of us who can't, it will be put on YouTube later. So they have a woman reporting on the state of men being allowed into prisons in Queensland. And they'll also have a paper from me talking about self-ID, which will be videoed and sent to them. You can join the Coalition for Biological Reality, which is an across the aisles group where those of us who work only with women meet with a whole bunch of other groups, with conservative women, with conservative men, with lesbian and gay groups. We now have a couple of different groups like LGB Alliance style groups across Australia. Gay men are beginning to get involved, which is good because they have more clout than women. So there are lots of things that you can do. You don't need to feel hopeless and helpless, though I confess I do spend a lot of my time running around like Henny Penny, telling everybody that the sky is falling, and the sky has kind of half fallen already, but it is never too late to get involved. With the federal election, we have a very mixed result for women in that the Labor Party policies, in my opinion, are overall better in terms of social justice, and that therefore includes women and other vulnerable groups. But by the same token, the future policies of the Labor Party were obviously written by trans activists and are solely based around the Yogyakarta principles, to which Australia is not a signatory, and which has not been put into our legislation. And
no state was signatory. They were
that's right.
Self-appointed delegates.
But they're behaving as if we're all signatories, and somehow CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, is out the window. We don't exist anymore. So it is difficult to work out, and there are whole factional discussions that Australians can have that would be totally boring for all of you overseas, but we should be having those discussions in Australia. I have noticed lately on Twitter, which is, a little silo in lots of ways, but also an interesting glimpse into certain sections of public opinion, that where 2 years ago, if there was a very pro-trans, anti-woman kind of article put up, or the pro-trans groups were singing our demise, that there would have been one or two of us going, hey, this isn't quite right, But now the ratio is completely on the side of biological reality and women's rights. And I find that quite heartening. So it's not completely lost, but we are kind of behind the eight ball. The UK is doing incredibly well, but if you look at what they've gone through for the last 5 or so years, they've worked incredibly hard to get to the point that they're at. And they have been fortunate to have Baroness Emma Nicholson in the House of Lords, for instance, and other politicians who are now speaking up, like Joanna Cherry in the Scottish National Party. We don't have politicians like that. We have a few tiny fringe politicians who speak up about this, but they're not really on the side of women. They're kind of on the side of sex stereotyping. And so the idea of trans ideology offends them because they are a bit homophobic and they like their sex stereotyping nice and neat, whereas that is not a feminist position. So we really need to get onto this. Self-ID is coming. We already have self-ID in principle in a number of states, because, for instance, in Victoria, where it's also now a crime punishable by prison to speak to someone about their gender identity self-diagnosis without instantly affirming it, as it is in Queensland. But in Victoria, for instance, you can engage the state in your fraudulent birth certificate by simply writing a statutory declaration that says, I am the opposite sex, and here is a friend of mine who also says I am the opposite sex. There is absolutely nothing involved to simply pretend that you are now the opposite sex. Bam, magic. So that's what's going to come to all of the states. And it's really important that women get on to addressing that both at state level and with their federal representatives. And right now, straight after an election is a really good time to start talking to your federal representatives and saying, well, hang on, how does this serve women?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the solutions, what Marcela calls citizen diplomacy. Let me please share with you this site in YouTube. And this, there is this young man called Isaac, who is a Detrans person and who is denouncing everything, and about what Angela said about psychologists. Here, for instance, he speaks about precisely psychologists and gender therapists and everything. So this is a very valuable material for those who have teenagers. This is really very interesting because sometimes teenagers listen to people their age much more than they listen to adults. So, for instance, here he addresses the question of Liam Thomas, the question of gender therapists, transgender propaganda, etc. So it's good that those young people are beginning to wake up.
I have to leave. I actually have to go to my day job now. So thank you for having me today. And very much thank you to Janet Maria, because what you're saying is so thought-provoking and so terribly important. I just want to make one final point that you're both ladies with very public profiles, and I really admire your courage in that. But for those of us who are very quiet and who never wanted a public profile, who never wanted to develop one, there is still all those things you can do, as Janet mentioned as well. But also even in your own small social circles and families, to sort of, when people come across with those ideological arguments, ask people to think about it a little bit more, invite them to consider other things as well. Don't underestimate the influence you can have very much at the grassroots. When you're in that PTA meeting at the school or the teacher says something, say, well, you know, that's an interesting perspective, but I actually have another perspective on that. Would you like to hear about that? And if you ask them if they'd like to hear about it, it makes it very hard for them to say no to you. So to keep just quietly but persistently having that conversation with whatever your family and social circles are, it does make a difference. It's just about getting other people to think about it. And certainly myself, I've written many policies, both in NGOs and public service, and sometimes just being quietly persistent. So not arguing, but just writing the policy, saying this is what the research says. Yes, it was rejected, but going back again and saying, would you like to think about that a little bit more? Can you consider that again? Is there any more information that you need about this? And being quietly persuasive. I found that very, very effective. And I've had a 30-year career, and I would have to very happily say that most of my policies haven't gotten through just with that quiet approach. Because if we get very adversarial, often what you get is pushback and you get more aggression. And one of the reasons I'm afraid that women are very frightened to speak up at the moment is there is a backlash, and that's been written about many times by feminists, and we often are subject to aggression. And when that's hard enough or painful enough, then it will silence them. So think about, if this isn't working for you, try another way. But the really important thing is to persist, to keep going. So thank you very much for inviting me today. Thank you very much, ladies, for sharing your expertise. I'm in absolute awe of what you were both doing, and also you, Veronica. So it's such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you again today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Angela. Thank you. See you next time. And thank you so much, Janet Fraser and Maria Keffler, who joined us from Australia and the US to talk about what women can do in public policies to defend our rights and also the rights of our children of our community, of our families. Let me just make a final point with a very short video that talks about public policies and senior citizens.
The issue of older women participation in public policies is a long debate. First of all, it is not true and not evident at all that the age is a fundamental part of the women issues. That's the first point. The second one, the older women themselves are giving up the participation in the construction of public policies related to them. And we can see the decrease of their participation at the high-level competition in sport, for instance. Starting the age of 60, there's a scandalous decrease of older women participation. Finally, the COVID pandemic is clearly showing the necessity of an integrated approach in between social and human science for one hand and medical and sanitarian scientific approach on the other hand. What is the role of the philosophy in between these two sides of the problem? We are making the necessary step to the creation of a philosophical academy in Panama. And this will be the work of an older woman, you can see, and a colleague at the University of Panama dealing with the aesthetic studies. Because the issue, the core issue is, what is the meaning of a person, no matter what, the age, the sex, and this is it's not a political issue.
Thank you very much, Edilia Camargo from Panama. She's a philosopher, a former UNESCO staff member, and a master's athlete. That's why she talks about women, senior women in sports. And she's now doing everything to establish an academy of philosophy, because she says that many of the problem is that people don't think, and they take everything, all the propaganda, without any further analysis. So again, Maria Keffler, thank you so much for having been with us tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And Janet Fraser from Australia, thank you very much. And thank you both for the incredible work and the courage you need to carry out this work and this influence on, God willing, public policies in the long run. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you for having me. It was great to meet you both.
It was lovely to meet you both as well. Thank you.
And this has been Life in Violet, raising feminist consciousness at a global level. Stay tuned.